Hi, and welcome to our coverage of the London Unity User Group's 30-second Meetup, another exciting frolic into the world of Unity development. This month's Meetup, like all of them, was an exciting one with talks from industry veteran Richard Fine on what he thinks is an underused part of the Unity API, along with some ideas and examples, and Jasper Stocker, one of the co-founders of these events, and his experiences creating tools in the asset store. As usual, we have exclusive interview footage along with the talks themselves, which you can skip to right now with these handy-dandy magic picture boxes. We love that you come to us for your LUUG fix, especially if you're not in London, and if you can't make it to these events. But if you can make it down, you definitely should. This month's event saw the return of the popular pitch and putt session, where anyone can show off anything Unity related and have a chat about things they're working on. And while they don't get the exclusive interviews, attendees do get to attend to a pint afterwards with indies, industry pros, and plenty of other interesting people. There's also an open mic session, a student spotlight, and plenty of opportunities to find work, advertise work, and make some contacts. Tickets run out fast and release a week before the event, so head to the link in the info box in the booty and keep your internets peeled for the next event. Perhaps we'll see you there.
First and foremost, what is ScriptableObject and why should any of you care about it? How many of the people in the room write code? Not necessarily are coders, but write code. Okay, most of you, this is good. This is predominantly a code-focused talk. Hopefully, even those of you who are not coders, you'll still be able to look at this and be like, oh yeah, this is the thing I should go and tell the coders to make for me. Should be good. So that's what this is going to cover to start with. Then how do you do anything with it? Because it would be pretty useless if I didn't tell you how to do it. And then lots and lots of examples, because to be honest, this is a really simple concept. It's not until people start to see it used a few times that they start to kind of get, oh, right, hey, I could do so much stuff with this. So I've got like a nice few examples, and hopefully we'll have time to get to a live demo towards the end as well. So the current situation, the current iron grip of the component tyranny, pretty much all the scripts you write are monobehaviors. If you have written code, if you've written code in Unity script, this has possibly been hidden from you. You're living under the tyranny, you don't even know it. But if you write code in C#, you will have seen all your classes derived from monobehavior. And this gives them certain properties. For starters, it means that you can then attach them to game objects. Yeah? So you write a script, you have a script, you drag and drop it, or add it from the component menu, attach it to your game object, and that's where it starts doing its thing. So they live in the scene. Or on prefabs. That's kind of just where they are. And they receive a number of callbacks from Unity. So this is the current situation. You write your script, you attach it to a game object, put the game object in the scene or stick it in a prefab, and you implement update and late update and fixed update and on became visible and on application quit or whatever else you like, and have the script do stuff in response to things. This is horrible. Horrible situation. Why? Why, you might ask? Why is monobehavior so bad? Thank you. Yes, exactly. You might, indeed you did. So the first time which that sucks is when you're exiting play mode. Everything you've changed on behavior, because they live in the scene gets reset. So anything you've changed on your monobehaviors gets reset as well. There's a couple of people who've tried to sort of work around this. Solutions on the asset store like play mode persist, but it's kind of, they're having to sneak data out the back door and back in again and so on. It's not a pleasant state of affairs. So the second time which it can suck is when you're instantiating things. Because you are creating a full copy of a game object when you instantiate it, all the components and all the data that lives in them has to be copied as well. The more components you have, the more data you're storing, the more you're copying. So instantiate gets slower. Now people working on mobile may be looking at that being like instantiate. We don't do instantiate, we pool everything. But this still affects your load times. What was I saying? Oh yes, sharing between scenes. So yeah, and there's a little bit of a pain trying to show these things between scenes. Like you have to make them into a prefab, and then you can't kind of nest prefabs inside them and things like that. Like the data sharing situation is not ideal when you've got stuff as a component. Sharing between projects is a bit of a pain as well. You know, you can make your thing into a prefab, and you can package the prefab into a Unity package and export that and then import it again. It's difficult to make sure that there aren't going to be other things in the hierarchy of that prefab you don't want. You could just try and copy the whole thing through regardless and just let bits of it break, but that's just horrible. So kind of like moving data, like if you've got like a nice set of default controller mappings or something like that that you have on an object in one project, you want to bring it to another one, prefab is not ideal for it. Version control. If you've got all this stuff on components in the scene, you have to check out or check in the entire scene. And has anyone used version control with the Unity project? Is it pain?
Makes me want to kill myself.
Yeah, it's horrible. And the big problem really is the granularity, that you keep on taking these little objects and gluing them together into either into massive scenes or into smaller prefabs. I mean, pretty much the first thing anybody will tell you if you're going to do version control with Unity is use prefabs for everything. Even a single-use object, make a prefab out of it so that you can just change that one prefab file. But this is still, like, it's kind of redundant as well, having to have the prefab and also put it in the scene just cause. So, oh yeah, and extending the editor. If you try writing editor scripts using monobehaviors, you'll very quickly find that Unity wants you to save your scene a lot because you keep changing the scene, because you're changing a thing that lives in the scene. So if you're doing any kind of editor extension stuff, you pretty much can't use monobehavior, or you're just going to keep stomping all over the scene the whole time. And there is one final point, which is the one that appeals to me personally the most, but it's kind of the most ideological one. It's just wrong. Oh, please. No, it's, there are so many situations where you have some data or some object, but it doesn't make sense for it to be in the scene. I mean, everything in the scene has a spatial transform. It's got a position, rotation, and scale. Now, if I have some data that defines like the stat values for an enemy, it doesn't make sense for those stat values to have a position, rotation, and scale. It's conceptually bollocks. So yeah, it's kind of, yeah, it just doesn't make sense, and it's really unpleasant and ugly to deal with it that way. So yeah, it would be nice if we could be shot of it. So enter ScriptableObject, dun da da da, People's Freedom Fighter or something. I don't know where I'm going with that theme. It is an alternative class to monobehavior. You can derive your scripts from it. Instead of writing class my class colon monobehavior, you can write class my class ScriptableObject. Now what will happen when you do that? First and foremost, the result will not be a component. You cannot attach a scriptable object to a game object. Yeah, well, I said that. So it can't get lost in the scene on some object somewhere. It can't get embedded deep down inside a prefab. It exists just on its own. It does not share with other components on an object or anything like that. It is just a thing itself. What it can be done is it can be saved into .asset files in your project. So you can make your enemy template, you can make your control mapping, and you can save it into a .asset file that lives in the project view. And when you click on that asset file in the project view, you get all the stuff in the inspector as you're used to with your scripts or your public variables and so on, just there in a nice long line for you to edit. And you can work with them, save projects, and it's all in that file. Never touches the scene at any point. So it's great for pod or plain old data. So things like tables of stuff, config, and so on. But there's also some other nice ways it can be used as well that I'll get to later in the talk. Also, this solves some of the polymorphism problems that people keep running into. If you ever have a situation where you're trying to, if you've made your own class that isn't a monobehavior or a scriptable object or anything, just a plain old class, and you've marked it serializable, and you've got like a list of those in your component, and then you have a subclass of that, and you want to be able to kind of have it be that the things in this list are either the base class or the subclass, or maybe one of a number of subclasses. Unity just doesn't do that. When you serialize it, it slices everything off and just assumes that whatever class you said in the list is what it is. With ScriptableObject, that's no longer the case because it saves it as a reference to the object. The object can actually be different types, and that will work correctly. You can also build tree structures and so on this way that you can't easily do with the basic serializer. But anyway, that's mostly a point for people who happen to know that on site and know what it is. If you haven't run into polymorphism problems already with Unity, you probably don't care about it for now. So the times at which ScriptableObject does not suck compared to monobehavior. First and foremost, when you are exiting the scene, it doesn't get reset because it doesn't live in the scene. You can make whatever changes you like to ScriptableObject during play mode, and they will all be kept. It's the same as making changes to things like shared materials and so on, but this is absolute blissful gameplay tuning. If you want to tune how much damage a particular enemy does or how much health he has or things like that, you can do all of that mid-gameplay as you keep on hammering on these guys without having to keep stopping and starting and stopping and starting and stopping and starting. And when you exit play mode, the thing is just kept as is. Instantiating things, yes. So rather than having a huge quantity of data in all the components that you have on your game object, you can have all the data kept in a scriptable object that just lives in the project, and then a component that just has a pointer to it, just has a reference to that shared asset. And suddenly your instantiate is super, super fast by comparison. You're just copying one 32-bit value. It's the same as instantiating a thing that just has one int in it, which is fine. Again, this is helpful for not just instantiating stuff if you're doing that during runtime, but even for load times as well. If you're pooling things, you want to get a load of things up and running. Also, lower memory usage, of course, for people on mobile. I mean, we're talking about game data here. Unless you have objects that routinely carry around a data table that's a few megabytes, you're probably not going to care. But if you do, having that data table just once in the project, and then other things refer to it, can suddenly save you a lot of memory very quickly. Next up, sharing between scenes. Again, this is kind of a non-issue because they don't live in scenes. They live outside of scenes, so they can be referenced by any scene quite happily without any trouble at all. Sharing between projects. Again, because they're just kind of an asset file with a thing in it. As long as you've got the actual classes that the thing's built on in the other project as well with the same IDs, you can just copy the asset file straight through and it all works totally fine. You may still want to use a Unity package file just to make sure that the necessary classes have come through as well, but it kind of guarantees minimal extra cruft coming along with it. You just get the data and the supporting class, and that is it. Yep. Version control. This is the point where it gets really nice. Because each of these things is just a file, it's just a file. You just have one thing that you're checking out, making change to, checking in again. You don't get merge conflicts with other people who are changing unrelated crap on other objects somewhere else because they're in separate files. It gets the granularity of your data to match the granularity of your file system and the granularity of your version control, which makes everything play much more nicely. And extending the editor. Pretty much everything that you do in editor extensions, custom windows, custom editors, they're all actually scriptable objects under the hood. And so you can have those and work with those quite happily, and they don't touch scenes. They don't have to touch the project at all. So it's not perhaps quite as perfect as I might be making it out to be. There are a couple of drawbacks, of course. We don't, otherwise people will probably use this already all the time. First thing is it doesn't get very many callbacks. It doesn't get anything on a per frame basis. It gets on enable, on disable, and on destroy, and that is it. This is still plenty for many situations, and you can do clever things in on enable, like finding objects in the scene and registering with them to have them call you back. So you can set up your own callbacks and so on. You just won't get Unity doing it for you beyond those basic three. And also, when you're going to go shared data with this stuff, it really does mean shared. You have one copy of the data. If you change it and you break something, you're breaking everything in the project rather than just that one particular time you were looking at it in that one particular scene. So it takes a little bit of getting used to in terms of workflow and so on. It's usually a win because it means that when you decide actually the enemy should have 20% more health, you can just change it in one place rather than having to go through all the different scenes and change all of them, and without any risk that someone somewhere has tweaked an enemy health up by 1 point and now suddenly it's not picking up the changes from the prefab anymore. So like that. So you need to be more aware of when you change something in a shared file, which things might be using that as well. And it is a little bit more work to set up because you can't just drag and drop it onto a component. There is no immediate way to just make a script object that you define be a file that you can then edit immediately, but it's very quick to write, and I will show you that now. So how do you use a scriptable object? So first and foremost, you just derive from it, which looks like that. Yeah, simple as. And then having made one of those, it won't show up in a menu anywhere. You can't go to a create custom assets, my asset, or anything like that, although it'd be cool if they added that. You need to write a little bit of editor code, which is just a script file that has to live in a folder called editor somewhere inside your project. You can have any folder anywhere inside the project as long as it's called editor. There is one exception, but you're probably not going to run into it, so I won't explain it. And Unity will kind of run that in the editor and let that access editor APIs for doing stuff. And so the simplest approach in the editor code is to use an undocumented method in a class called project window util that I found by just reflecting and decompiling Unity a bit. And then it comes out looking like this. So you have this little static method called createAsset that I tend to call it. And you can see just above it, it's marked with this menu item attribute. When you mark a method in editor code with menu item, that makes it show up in the menus, either in Unity somewhere. So I've said this should show up in the assets menu under create as my ScriptableObject. And then inside the function itself, the first line, I use ScriptableObject.createInstance to go and make an actual instance of my ScriptableObject. Just as with mono behaviors, you can't just do new my object. You have to go and ask for it specially because there's things on the engine side backing it up. But ScriptableObject.createInstance will go and make it. So I then have that come back as a new obj. And the second line, I then create an actual file in the project that I save that object into. And that project window util.createAsset method will take care of making sure that it's in the right place within the project, kind of in like the place the user's looking in right now. It will automatically select it to be renamed, exactly the same way that things do when you add like a new material or something like that. It makes it behave in the most Unity-like way possible. There are other methods you can use, like assetDatabase.createAsset, but that sort of will just dump things somewhere in the root of the project, and then you have to go and find them and be like, where the hell did my asset go? This is much nicer. So you don't have to save these things to asset files as well. You can create them and just use them on a temporary basis, which can be helpful for things. I've done this with profiler stuff. If I want like a report on all of the renderable objects in my scene because I'm trying to debug draw calls or something like that, I spin up a ScriptableObject and I fill it with all the data, and then it's kind of there and it survives things like recompiling in the editor and so on without losing all its data, and other useful stuff like that. It can have a custom inspector and nice things. So we can get on some examples because some of you are looking a little bit blank, which is fine. So the first thing, the thing I've made reference to a couple of times is this idea of something like shared enemy settings. So what would this actually look like in practice? So the idea is to store common immutable data, so data that's not changing over the course of gameplay, in a scriptable object that can just be referred to by enemy instances. So we're talking about things like maximum health, the amount of damage they do on a hit, the different attack types they're allowed to do, and so on. I'm not talking about things like the health they currently have or which attacks they can perform right now, because those things would change naturally over the course of gameplay and would be specific to each enemy and so on. So what might that look like? That might look like this. So we've got a very simple, simple scriptable object, 3 little bits of data. If I plug that into Unity and create an instance of it and click it, I will just get then those 3 fields in the inspector exactly the same way as I do with a mono behavior. So I can then start just plugging numbers in, ticking boxes and so on. That all works completely fine. So the enemy instance would then have a public enemy settings field, exactly the same way as you would do with any other object reference. So that might look like this. Somewhere inside the enemy class is just this public enemy template. And again, this will show up in the inspector as an object field for you to drag and drop a thing in. But rather than you dragging and dropping something from the hierarchy, you can just drag and drop your custom asset file onto it, and it will link up quite happily. Unity will also do all the necessary work to make sure that it's the right type that you're working with as well. So if you've got different scriptable objects in your project for different purposes, you won't be able to drag an audio cue into your enemy template slot and things like that. Even though it's all .asset, Unity does know the difference internally. This, I'm going to argue, is better than just having a prefab for each enemy type. Firstly, there is less memory used, and instantiate is cheaper because all this extra data that's common to all of them isn't being copied every single time. Each enemy isn't maintaining its own copy of all this common data and so on. It's sort of referring to the same common set in one place. There's an enforced consistency as well. So this is tying it a little bit into just the game design of the idea that if you have 3 different orcs that all look identical and one of them has double health, that's kind of a bastard move to do to your player, because the player has no clue that that's going to be the case. And usually designers want to avoid that sort of thing happening by accident. Usually it's a bug if this particular guy takes 3 times as many bullets to kill as everybody else with no apparent explanation as to why. So by putting all the data in one place, you're forcing there to only be one value. You're preventing it ever being possible to give one enemy double health because there is no per enemy maximum health field. See what I mean? It also becomes slightly easier to then switch out all the settings in one go for something else. So you could make awk on easy, awk on medium, awk on hard as different assets, and then you're switching one reference on your object to a different template, and suddenly all the settings have changed very neatly. Yeah. And easier to tune globally while in play mode. So while you're going through, you can be editing these enemy settings template files, just in the inspector, just hitting pause, or even not hitting pause, just while the game is running, just changing it all. And as new enemies spawn, or just as calculations that depend on those values take place, they then use the new values immediately. When you exit play mode, none of it's reset, it's all kept. So you tune it to whatever you need, and then it's all fine. So that is a simple example of using scriptable objects for just sort of shared data tables, is what I'd call. I mean, it's, 3 things is not really a table, but you get the idea. Like you could easily imagine how that would build up to more and more and more information as your enemies get more complex and they have more information that needs to be stored. So the next sort of situation that you might want to consider these things in. So something that I'm doing on a project at the moment, I have different ammunition types. The player carries a certain amount of each given type of ammunition at a time. When he finds a pickup, it has certain quantities of different ammunition types in it and so on. A fairly standard kind of inventory system with like massive stacking. So what's the idea of using scriptable objects with this? So the idea is that you have this ammo type subclass of scriptable object that has nothing in it at all. Just looks like that. And then you have individual instances of that to represent the different ammo types that you've got in the project. So this is a little bit like having an enum with different entries in the enum. Instead, you have this class and the different objects of the class. Yeah? But you define all those objects actually as asset files that live in the project window. And then you use references to the assets to describe things like which ammo type is in a pickup or which ammo type a weapon uses and so on. You take advantage of the fact that you can compare object references just as you can compare enums. And that's all you ever really actually do with enums anyway. You're only interested in like sort of, is this thing this entry or that entry? Is it not that entry? And so on. You can do all those comparisons with object references just as you can with enums. So I then, for example, would have a dictionary mapping ammo type objects, which are the different objects from inside my project, to integers of how much of each ammo I have right now. And then when I'm running in my weapon code or something, I'll have something in the weapon for its primary ammo type, which again is an object I've just dragged and dropped in from the project, representing one of the types of ammo. And then I can sort of check it and say, okay, if the inventory is empty for that ammo type, then don't fire the weapon. I'll play a click sound or whatever. So why is this good? I mean, I appreciate this is a slightly, it's easier to see this one in practice, I guess. Why is this good? First and foremost, it's better than an enum, which is the other thing you would use for this sometimes. Changes to the ammo types don't require any recompiles. Now, something like ammo types maybe is a bad example because you probably aren't adding new types of ammo every other day. But for other things where you have huge numbers of different kinds of events or different character gestures or something like that, where you have a long enum of different things and designers keep on adding in new things to represent new situations and so on, it can be a pain having the programmer having to go in and keep adding in entries to the enum. Doing it this way, the designer can just make a new ammo type, new audio cue, new whatever, and then it's in the project and completely designer friendly, which is good. It's also really easy to then start hooking on other information. So in the case of ammo types, I might hook on something like, is armor piercing, is a tracer round, weight, so how much does each round weigh when computing, like, am I overburdened, or something like that. Because those are just things that you start adding to the ammo type scriptable object, and then suddenly for every ammo type, it's something that people can start setting for things. And a lot of the situations in code where you're doing if ammo type equals ammo type.armor piercing, then do this, 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 this. And then when someone says, actually, we need also explosive armor piercing and like silenced armor piercing and radioactive armor piercing, and you have to keep going back and adding more and more and more things to the if. Instead, it just becomes if ammo type dot is armor piercing. Then do all that. It becomes much more data driven. It is only slightly slower than native enums, and even then I'm not entirely sure about that. I don't think it is particularly. And it's usually exactly the same memory cost because enums are usually ints under the hood, and those are 32 bits, and so are object references. And also you get null support this way. If you ever work with enums and you keep on having to put like an unknown or nothing entry or something at the beginning, it's slightly ugly. It's much nicer to be able to say if not ammo type or something like that, then you get that naturally with this. It supports null quite happily. You just don't set the reference to anything. Okay, and also it can be a generic type constraint, which enum can't do for reasons that escape my understanding. So if you've ever run into, if you use generics and type constraints and you felt my pain, then this is the solution. Right. So one more talk through example, then I've got into a live demo. So consider an RPG with different colored potions that have various effects. The potion artwork is all pretty similar. It's just kind of like a vial. The liquid in the potion is like a different color or something like that. And then the effect of the potion, this one's a health potion, recharges X amount. This one blinds you for 20 seconds. This one summons all the enemies. This one poisons you immediately. It's kind of cruel, etc. How might we implement that? So one of the nice things we can do with ScriptableObject is they don't just have to be data. They can contain functions as well, completely happily. So what we could have is we could have an abstract class, potion effect, which is a ScriptableObject, that has a method for kind of applying its effect. And then in each subclass, we define a subclass for each individual different kind of effect that can happen. So we can have potion effect, and then a subclass of that can be boost health. Subclass of that can be like do damage. Subclass of that can be grant recharge mana or something like that. And using virtual functions, an abstract function in the base class and then an overridden function in each derived class, we can have the effect be kind of specialized. So the idea is that the subclass has apply and then a target that it's applying it to that implements the effect specific to that type of potion effect. So what might that look like? The potion effect class itself is abstract, and it says there is an apply function. A potion effect is a thing you can apply to a game object. And I say nothing more than that. And then for an individual effect, something like boost health, you derive from potion effect. You can have data that's specific to boosting health, like how much to boost it by. And then you implement that apply method and you say, okay, well, get the stats component on the game object and boost its health. Incidentally, of course, this does mean that anything with a stats component would be able to use a potion, be it a friendly NPC or an enemy or whatever. The potion's completely agnostic as to exactly what is drinking it or what it's being applied to. So there's no need to have a separate prefab for each individual potion. You can have one potion prefab that has an effect plugged in, and when you spawn your potion, maybe you pick the effect from a list, or you pick the effect according to the rules of what kind of potion you want to spawn at that time. You can just have one potion prefab that has all the behavior for being pick-upable and being drinkable, but then all of the extra work it does to actually have the effects of being drunk gets offloaded into these scriptable objects that just sit in the project. The potion effect could include, for example, a material or just a color that the prefab then uses to change its material in a slight way. So kind of rather than creating ahead of time all these different prefabs, you have one that you kind of reconfigure using the scriptable object. You might only have one instance of a particular subclass. Maybe when you have a die immediately potion, there are no variants on that. There's just, you create that once, you use it once. But for the boost health one, you might create that class, but then have small health potion, medium health potion, large health potion. They're all boost health, but one is 10 points, one is 50 points, one is 100 points, kind of thing. So yes, and you could even have a potion that had an array of potion effect for multiple effects. If you want a potion that blinds you and grants you health, then you just have a list of those things and you just run through each one and call apply. Okay. So, oh yes, and the effect itself shouldn't really do very much of the actual work. Like it could start a coroutine on the potion object or on the player. It can't run coroutines itself because it's not a mono behavior. It can't kind of start something that has to run over several frames. But if you wanted something like blind for 20 seconds, you'd have to make sure that it can talk to a debuff system that understands the idea of like a debuff that times out after a while. Right, sorry, yeah, one more example quickly on the editor. So light mapping presets. The basic idea here, you define a scriptable object that's a light mapping preset. It has all the same things as Lightmap Editor settings has in it. So number of bounces, the amount of environment light, the amount of ambient occlusion, all the other things that you would set in the Lightmap settings window. And you add an apply method to it that copies all of them to Lightmap settings, and possibly a capture setting that copies them all back the other way again. You expose them to the UI somehow, editor window, menu item, whatever. And then you can create different presets for preview quality light mapping, interiors, exterior on the moon, exterior on Saturn, sunny morning, etc. You can have all of these different light mapping presets set up without having to worry about, oh, what happens if I'm going to play with the settings in this level and, oh, here it changes. Or possibly you don't want to have one level light mapped 2 different ways. Then you can have 2 different presets up there. There is one easy way to do all of this, which is to just go and download Light Mapping Extended, which you should do. It's free and it's great. And this is what they do, except that they do XML files instead of scriptable objects, but the same principle. So yeah, this gives you these preset files that can then be renamed and moved and copied and so on. You can duplicate settings and try out different values very, very easily. They can be versioned, so you can check the settings into version control, and then it's just another thing you don't have to worry about someone messing with in the scene. They can be transferred between projects, so if you came up with a lighting environment that's really, really nice for your desktop thing and you're doing a completely separate cut-down iOS thing, you want to copy it all through, that's all fine. Yeah, so that's all good. Right, live demo if we have time. Time? Good. Okay. So I threw this together in, I don't know, maybe, good, maybe, I don't know, 4 hours. So I'll just show you what I've got for starters. Right, so the idea was to create something resembling a basic kind of shoot 'em uppy thing. So I've used ScriptableObject in a few ways in this project that I want to show you. So the first one is audio. If you've ever, has anyone here worked with systems like WIs or Fmod Studio? Okay, so a couple of people, yeah. How does Unity's audio compare? Yeah, okay, thumbs down, yeah, okay. I mean, some of you, if you've been paying attention to the Unity 5 stuff, they've got a lot of stuff coming out with kind of like setting up buses and channels and so on. But one of the first things that people usually want to do is to be able to take the audio clip that's being used and kind of randomize the pitch a little bit, randomize the volume a little bit and so on, just to create a little bit more variety in the soundscape. And there's nothing built in for that at all. There's nothing coming for that either. However, ScriptableObject provides a nice way to do that. So what I've got here, I've got a little folder of my audio cues. So I've got something like the enemy firing audio cue. And so what I've set up here is I've got my 5 different clips to use. I've got the volume settings, I've got pitch settings. So first and foremost, let's try and make this so we can actually hear it. Can anyone hear that's gotten a bit louder? I'll push it a bit more. Yeah, so just changing it in there, and it's all coming through completely live in that. And I can mess with the pitch variation as well. And if I push it all up to 2, I don't know whether we can really hear a lot of the difference. Okay, you can hear the occasional very low one in there now as well. And just by changing that range, yeah? So suddenly I'm able to do a lot of variety to my sound without having to repeatedly write code all over the place for randomize the volume, randomize the pitch, pick from one of these different clips and so on. And so I've got a different cue for each one of these. Grenade explode, grenade fire and so on. And these are all instances of exactly the same class, which if I can fire it quickly now. Pum, 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 pum. Just looks like that. So a bit bigger. So you see I've just got an array of clips, minimum maximum volume, minimum maximum pitch, and then a play function where I pass in an audio source and it sets up the audio source to play the sound in the way that it needs to. Okay. So with that, I can then have an audio cue variable on my scripts elsewhere, and I can just do audio cue.play and pass an audio source to use, and it just does all its magic internally. And I can add other things into this as I need to. I can add looping, I can add playing one shot versus not. I can add, is it responding to changes in time scales? I can do slow-mo sound that slows down correctly with stuff or whatever.
So you're writing this script to just drag and drop to the...
Right, so the only thing that, so the other component to this is the little bit of editor script, which is this one. There we go. Yeah, and this is how I actually then create an instance of it. So it's very similar to the code I showed you earlier. First line, create the asset. Second line, save it to a file. And then for the third line, I just return the asset just because maybe it'd be useful. And so then within Unity, this gives me the ability to come into this folder and just do create audio cue victory or something like that. And then start dragging and dropping in clips and volumes and things like that.
How does the ship call that? It's just like a couple of volumes?
Yeah, so what I have on the ship then, I think on the gun actually, I have a couple of audio cue variables, audio and firing, the cue to play when you're doing a grenade, and then when it's actually time to fire these things, then I have audio and firing.play, and I pass it the audio source that's on the gun to say, this is the thing you want to plug your clip into, set up the pitch, set up the volume, and actually play it off. Yeah. Okay. So that's that. Right, the other major thing, oh yeah, that's right. Right, I do actually have different damage types in the game. I'm not really using them very effectively, but the grenade does a kind of EMP burst, whereas the regular shots do, I think, energy that heats up things. Now, suppose that actually what I want to do is I want to have the grenade do the energy burst, and I want the regular projectile to be EMP or something like that. I look on my grenade explosion, and underneath the I've got this area damage script where I just tell it what kind of damage and how much. And so having defined these different damage types, which again are pretty much just empty instances of the same damage type scriptable object, I can say actually rather than EMP, I want this to be an energy grenade. And yeah, let's grab the regular projectile and say, oh yeah, the other thing that's nice about this, you can use the object picker and it will give you a list of the ones in the project correctly, filtered by type as you might want. So pick EMP. And now what I should have, never actually tested this. There we go, that's a bit of EMP, and it's not doing very much. Okay, it doesn't seem to do very much. I think it's turned slightly red because they get red as they get warmer, but it doesn't seem to do. Actually, you know what? Let's just make it more damaging. Oh yes, 3 points of damage, bugger all. Let's try that. There we go. Right. So I can swap the damage types around. You can imagine if I had like 15 different kinds of projectiles, then that would be very convenient for me to be able to customize exactly. This one does this many points of EMP and this many points of heat and a little bit of impact damage, and I could do all kinds of interesting hybrid setups and so on. I'll finish this and I'll get to Q&A if we get some time. Right. And the one last thing I want to show you, you can see the two ships were doing different things. One of them was kind of well. I can't remember. One of them just basically sits there, fires a bunch of shots, and then fires a grenade. The other one fires 3 shots and then kind of moves across in a sweep. And both of these are using attack pattern scripts, basically, which again I have defined as scriptable objects. So I've got my left-right program, which is this long series of steps. Wait and then begin moving left, and then wait and then stop, and then begin moving right, and then begin firing, and then stop firing, and so on. And this is kind of an ugly interface to build this stuff in, but I could quite very easily write a custom editor or something like that to make it a lot easier to work with. And then I have just the one enemy prefab, and I've just plugged in which program it is that it uses. So I have an on-off program and I have a left-right program. So I could very easily have a whole wave of guys all doing the same action or whatever. I can define a whole wave super, super fast with this stuff. Okay. Right, so there's the bits I wanted to show within Unity, and let's just finish off the slides very quickly. And I think we have time for a couple of questions. Right. So to conclude things, ScriptableObject is awesome, yeah, with the fireworks and all, yeah. And it should be more widely used than it is. People, for whatever reason, people just don't learn about it. And the documentation is not good. It's a little bit unfortunate because there's so little of it to explain. I think the documentation kind of just like, yeah, this is the thing, you just make classes from it and it just works. And everyone's like, sorry, I blinked, I missed that, what? It's actually so simple that people miss it, but it's really, really powerful. So yeah, occupy mono behavior, yeah. And start considering cases where you've got mono behaviors that don't need to be. So lastly, I have been super big. Feel free to tweet at me with stuff. That is fine. I will put the slides up, yes. I believe the whole thing is being filmed and hopefully all that will go up, and including a 15-minute exclusive interview with me where I babble about shit. It's great.
Okay, we have Richard Fine with us, who's going to give us a little interview. Hi, Richard. How are you?
I'm good. A bit rushed, but good.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, first off, just a little about your talk today that you gave. What are scriptable objects and what can they be used for?
Well, it's a different approach to designing code in Unity. People are very used to writing all the code in Unity using a class called mono behavior and attaching the scripts that they create as components to the individual game objects in their scene. But this isn't a good fit for a lot of things, and there are some drawbacks, which I covered in the talk. And ScriptableObject provides another way to approach writing all these things, so you can just have kind of all your data as files in your project rather than as objects in your scene. This is very convenient for things like enemy templates or settings files, or I'm going to show an example. I've shown an example using audio cues, stuff like that, like all kinds of things that don't make sense as objects in the game world, but you still want to have as data. ScriptableObject is useful for that. Okay, great.
So what's the advantage of a data-based object compared to one attached to a game object? I mean, would you say it's more versatile, or does it have its sort of specific uses?
The first key thing is just that it's a nicer conceptual fit. Rather than trying to remember, oh yes, I attached it to this particular object in this someplace in the hierarchy, you've got a lot more kind of freedom to organize it. And it's with something like an enemy template, it isn't something that exists in space. So where do you put it in the scene? It's kind of every object in the scene has a position, and it doesn't make sense really for something like an enemy template to have position, rotation, and scale. So it's a better conceptual fit. There's also a range of advantages, including things like the ability to change them during gameplay and not have them reset when you exit play mode. They more nicely work with version control, so you can check in and out the individual files that you're working on rather than it being part of the scene that has to be checked in and out as an entire unit, and so on. There's things like that.
Okay, great. So now we just want to talk a bit about you and your background and the things that you've done. So you've been coding from quite a young age, and the age of 4, I believe you started?
Started age 4, yes.
Wow, that's really young.
Yeah, I inherited a BBC Micro from my grandfather. One of these, I mean, people these days often haven't even seen them. But these big kind of, it looks like a keyboard, but the whole thing is the computer, and you plug it into the TV. And along with that, I also inherited some books. A lot of which was over my head, but there were quite a lot of just like listings, just code listings for games that you could type in all the code and then type run, and then you'd have the game to play. Right. And being 4 years old, I was very keen to play some games, so I learned how to type in all these listings. And after a while, I started to realize that when there was a line that, well, one of the first things I learned was when I typoed, how to fix a line, so how to rewrite a bit of the program when I got it wrong. But what I realized after a while was that if there was a line that says something like set lives equals 3, I could rewrite that to set lives equals 30, and then play the game, and then I have 30 lives. Right. So initially I was motivated by wanting to cheat.
Cheat, of course.
But it established this understanding that, hey, like I'm not just sacrificing hours of typing to the god of computer in return for a game. There's a logical relationship between what I'm typing in and what I'm then seeing on the screen. So I started to kind of, I remember kind of trying to trace program flow with my finger and sort of watching when it said go to this line. I'd then jump to that line with my finger and try and work out roughly what was going to happen and what circumstances would need to arise for a particularly interesting looking bit of code to run and things like that. Just a lot of time spent looking at programs and working out how they would behave. And then, yeah, from there, I think at about age 7, I was using QBasic and HyperTalk on Mac in a program called HyperCard that no one's ever heard of these days. And then graduated upwards from there. I think I sold my first game to my IT teacher when I was about 11.
Awesome.
So there.
That's great. So when you were learning, what would you say were the most useful tools for you learning to code? I mean, you talked about obviously the books and having the equipment.
Yes, I mean, at a very young age, it was obviously pre-internet. I didn't touch the internet until I was about 12, I think. So a lot of experimentation and a lot of never being willing to just accept that's the way it is for an answer was a big part of it. It's kind of, if it does something this way in one situation and this other way in a different situation, then there must be some material difference between those two that would differentiate one from the other. And understanding that very early on helped me then kind of say, okay, well, what is the difference between these two situations? And just doing lots of experimentation and working things out. Lots of just dumping program state at times and being like, what is this variable? What does this even mean? Kind of thing. And trying to copy and paste bits of listings from other programs into my one, but sort of make them fit together. And then once I gained access to the internet, there was a transformative time when I just spent a long time hanging out in chat rooms. From about the age of 13, I was in the GameDev.net chat room, almost non-stop, and most of the time just listening.
Okay.
And just listening to other people explain the problems that they had in their games and someone else answering. And after a while, I began to learn what some of the answers were to the common questions and be able to answer them myself. And I understood the answers as well, so I was able to adapt and adopt and so on. And so a lot of my experience, while I actually don't have very many published titles to my name, I have I've stuck my finger in lots of other people's games.
Okay, great. Okay, so you're self-taught mostly.
Yes, I did go to Oxford, but I'm not a good poster child for an Oxford student. I went to most of my lectures in first year. I didn't go to really any lectures in second, third or fourth years. I went to just enough labs to handwork in.
Right.
It was difficult because I'd covered a lot of the stuff already. So I'd go along to lectures and think, well, I kind of know all this, but then suddenly theuld be something that I didn't know. So it was always a bit of a mad rush in the run-up to exams, but like, actually there's a lot of things I missed here.
Okay.
And just kind of try and rush through. But yeah, I mean, when I started with self-teaching, I mean, the experience at Oxford, meeting lots of people who could expose me to interesting ideas very quickly, but I then would run off and pursue those ideas on my own.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So do you think a kind of more traditional education in programming and development and stuff like that is valid anymore? Do you think it needs to be?
I'm not sure we have a traditional education in programming. I mean, there is really nothing worthwhile pre-university anyway. I mean, I remember looking at A-level computing, and it was all about kind of designing 1970s era sort of batch processing sales systems for caravanning sites or things like that. And it's kind of, okay, yes, like these things get used, but they're a very, very small part of what everything was. So the syllabus was always very out of date. It's kind of an inevitable result of a field that changes so quickly, particularly when people are trying to teach anything more than the core principles. And a lot of the things on a university course, teaching core computer science ideas, this haven't really changed since the 1960s. A sort algorithm is still a sort algorithm, and no one's managed to beat Tony Hawk's quicksort yet, I think. But with a lot of the more technically specific things, those become obsolete very quickly. So we don't really have a strong tradition of these things. What we do not have, but is more valuable, is a tradition of problem solving and critical thinking. That is the thing that is worth having in the schools and in the formal education and so on. But even then, I mean, a lot of schooling is set up in a way that's almost antithetical to that.
Yeah.
The nature of a classroom is such that there's only so much students questioning what the teacher's saying that you have time for. Of course, yeah. And there's only so many students who can ask a question before the teacher has to say, well, okay, like we have to move on because other people don't have the same question and so on. Group learning is not conducive that often to kind of being able to ask questions and pursue things to the bitter end, which is what it would be helpful to people to learn to do.
Right, okay. So what advice would you give to someone who wants to, as I say, a young person like yourself at one stage, who wants to learn to program? And
experiment lots, and remember that most advances in knowledge aren't moments of going, aha, the moments of going, oh, that's weird. Looking at some program and like looking at a bug in a program that you use and speculating as to why that might happen and trying to come up with something that's plausible, and just trying to keep reconciling everything you figure out with everything else you figure out, to spot all the points where things seem to overlap and there might be a common principle involved, or where they don't fit together and you must be wrong about one of them or both of them. Yeah, okay.
Awesome. Right, that's a really interesting jacket you're wearing.
Yeah.
I've heard that you got it for, was it most bugs found
Something
in Unity
like that.
builds?
So I participate quite heavily in the advanced alpha and beta testing of Unity. I've been involved since Unity 3.5, Unity 4.0 kind of time. And we get copies of Unity ahead of time and we hammer it, we try things out and so on. We also give feedback on what we're finding is like easy to use, what's difficult, what makes sense, what doesn't make sense, what is fit for purpose and what isn't. And yes, I have twice received special thanks from the head of the QA department there for my feedback. Not just mine. There were a few people kind of named.
Right. Okay.
But yes, we received special recognition for the feedback that we'd given as being like an extraordinarily high quality.
Yeah.
And yes, I got sent this jacket, which was
awesome.
nice.
That
I
is really
got sent a couple of tablets as well, but they don't.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I actually like the jacket more.
Yeah, I prefer the jacket. I think it's quite dashing. Okay, so one more last question before we let you go.
Yep.
We've heard you're really into your cooking and your applied food science,
yes.
I think it's called, is
yeah,
it?
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, what people would call modernist cooking, or some people call molecular gastronomy, but that's actually, that's not quite what, a lot of the people who do this stuff would not call it molecular.
Right, okay, so
yeah. But yeah, the application of scientific principles to food in a way where you actually go and use it to cook a better steak.
Right, okay.
Rather than just learning about proteins in a lab, going and actually being like, how can I use this to make tastier things? I mean, so this has involved things like sous vide. So I have a water circulator. I'm saving up for a vacuum sealer.
Right.
I've been playing around with spherification techniques. Most recently, I've been trying to perfect the cheeseburger.
A cheeseburger, wow, okay.
Yeah, using things like melting salts to make the cheese. It's kind of like making your own processed cheese, but with real cheese.
Yeah.
And then processing it yourself, so you get something that melts in just the right way.
Oh, wow.
So it kind of goes gooey in just the way you want around the burger without kind of being too bitty and stuff like that. And messing around with that kind of thing.
Awesome, that sounds really amazing.
So that's been quite fun and tasty.
Yeah, sounds it. Okay, thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate you having an interview with us.
Thank you.
Cheers, thanks very much.
So as Darren Lloyd said, I'm Jasper Stocker. I'm a freelance Unity developer. I've been using Unity for about 5.5 years now. And as was mentioned, back in 2011, me and Russ set up a London Unity user group. I ran it for a year with him, and then, as I briefly mentioned just then, I buggered off to Hong Kong. My wife got offered a 2-year contract and decided to, jump at that chance. So for the last 2 years, we've been in Hong Kong, which was fantastic. We just recently got back, and that's why I'm standing here in front of you rather than being in Hong Kong. Yeah, I've been on the Asset Store for 3.5 years. So I guess being there pretty early on in the Asset Store when it just sort of come out. I started selling 1 package on there, and now I'm selling 5. I've got about 285 star ratings, and I'm averaging 5 stars, which I have to say I am proud of, but it's been a lot of hard work to sort of get that. So what is the Asset Store? First of all, let's have a hands up of who's been to the Asset Store. Good. And then let's have a show of hands for who's actually purchased anything off the Asset Store. Yeah, about half of the people have been actually purchased. That's good. So for those of you who've never been, it's essentially like the App Store in a way, but for game developers using Unity. There are loads of assets, whether it's like art assets, there are loads of scripts, tools, lots of things that you can buy, or lots of things for free. You can rate things, review things, but the kind of concept is that these things will save you time by purchasing them or just downloading them, and then you'll put them in your project, and then in theory it will save you time and will make them worthwhile actually paying for them. There are a lot of assets on there now. I think the last count was 15,000 assets on the store now. So there's a lot of competition out there now. There's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of duplications, a lot of things doing the same thing, but maybe in different ways, maybe better, maybe worse. So a brief sort of overview where I shamelessly plug my assets, but sort of give you an idea of where I'm coming from as an asset publisher. My first asset was Camera Path, which I released back in May 2011, which just sort of animates stuff in Unity. It could be game objects as well, not just cameras. But that's on the 3rd version now. I've got Builder, which is a procedural building generator. That's my most expensive asset. It's like $60 US. Track Builder, which kind of runs off the same name and sort of goes for the racetracks. DocuMaker was something I whipped up in a weekend to help me generate like the documentation you need to create for these assets. And it was so quick and easy to do that, just put that out there for free, and maybe it will help some other people who need to make documentation for their code. And then I do have one art asset that I kind of had bits and pieces to throw together. That's like $5, and I think 3 people have bought that, which is maybe indicative of how good my art skills are. So, getting published on the asset store. Who's actually published on the asset store? Show of hands. We've got 3 people. Okay, so could you leave the room? For those of you who have obviously never done it, which is most of you, it is actually a pretty simple process. It couldn't be much more simpler. But basically, you'll have something in your project or some art assets that you think you can wrap up into a package. You'll basically just take them, and then you'll take an asset on the asset store that puts the assets into the asset store. It's kind of a bit Inception-like there. And you'll just wrap up your assets. But then at this point, you'll realize you'll need to do like your logo, you'll have key art, you have to decide a title, and then you've got description text, so you have to enter in all of that. And you've got to like really try, and at this point, you realize you've now actually got to sell this thing. You've got to pick a price. Is it going to be free? Is it going to be $100 because I'm worth that? I don't know. But it's sort of best at this point to look at what else is on the market already, gauge your competition if there is any, or anything that's similar. The asset store guidelines does kind of give you a nice little table that kind of gives you ideas, but it's a bit sort of, it won't tell you what you should be selling. But the good thing with the price is it's not actually set in stone. So you can actually go back to it a month later and say it's too expensive, no one's buying it, or I'm selling it way too cheap, let's just up the price and see what happens there. And then you click go, and it uploads it to Unity. And believe it or not, the asset store is curated when you look at some of the art assets on there. So it might get rejected. There is the possibility of rejection. Like one thing there is just a crap ton of is in art assets is weapon packs. So if you think you've got the greatest collection of AK-47s, there's already about 15 AK-47 packs on there. So unless you're doing something really special, like it's an AK-47 with a paisley pattern on or something like that, you're probably going to get rejected. So it's best to look what's on there and know you bring in something special to the table. But a general rule with this sort of stuff is, you usually find that in a game, you might have, in making your game, you'll be making tools or like little extensions maybe, or you have like a selection of assets in your game that you feel like you could package together and sell on the asset store and maybe make some money. So that's sort of one of the best ways to sort of get onto the asset store, because you don't start something from scratch and sort of develop all your time into making an asset. And then of course, you can use the funds from your asset sale to fund further development of your game. So that's really good. The other sort of concept really good for like when you're starting out making assets is, are you solving a problem that other people are having? Or have you seen a problem that other people are having that you should fill? That's something that I saw with Camera Path like 3.5 years ago. How do you animate stuff like for a cutscene? I found that every game needed a cutscene. And at that point, there was just nothing out there. There's tons of stuff out there now. So yeah, you put it on the asset store, profit, maybe. The NGUI guy, the rumor mill goes on the asset store is that he was making $200,000 a month at the peak. Obviously, that was the past tense now because we've got UGUI coming along. I don't know that from the horse's mouth, though, but what I have heard from Unity is that the top 10% of the publishers tend to be making about $1,000 a month, which is pretty good. So I'm being talking about marketing a lot now because I'm not really going to be talking about how to make an asset. That's not particularly interesting. But I'm going to be talking about something that maybe a lot of people don't pay attention to or spend enough time on, because it really should be done. And I feel like this is quite a nice summary of marketing, basically, because everything is the same for most customers, and your job when you're marketing something is to tell your customer, like, my product is special. It really is. I really like that diagram. But a lot of people say, the best stuff just floats to the top, and mine's going to be the best. And sort of the problem there is, on the asset store, you've got I believe, 1 staff pick, you got 4 featured items along the bottom, and then you got 24 items, icons underneath that. So you've got 29 spaces if you want to float to the top, and that's not a lot of space. So if you're doing anything niche, there's sort of no chance of you rising to the top there, because like not enough people are going to be buying your RPG like inventory pack to be like competing with like NGUI at the top there. A lot of people will say how much time you should be spending on marketing, and it's very similar to game dev. You should be spending, sadly, more time on marketing than you should be actually making your game. So if you spend a month making your asset, you need to be spending more than a month actually marketing that asset. And of course, there are loads of things that go into marketing. It's not just sort of, you know, Facebook ad campaigns or whatever like that. And a lot of people say, I don't have time for that. I don't have time to spend more time on marketing than I do actually making. And I want to be making. I got into this sort of thing. I want to be making cool stuff. I don't want to be making icons and like, you know, tweeting like, I've got a great asset, like constantly. But that's great if you don't have time, but then unfortunately your customers won't have time for your asset because they just won't ever see it. You just need to sell your asset to them. You need to convince them that they need it. You need to convince them that it's worth their hard-earned cash. You need to convince them that it will save them more money by spending the money on this, by buying it. And you need to convince them that your product is better than any other products they might be able to find out there, or that it will be better than what they can make themselves. Now, I'm not saying that I spend like more time marketing than I do making stuff. I'm more or less like you guys. I definitely need to spend more time marketing. But it is something that I've, in the last sort of 6 months, or no, 9 months now actually, I've been spending a lot more time on, and I've been seeing the benefits really quickly. So I'm going to be talking about key art, which for those of you who don't really know the asset store, it's sort of your pictures and your technical difficulties. Yeah, it's basically like your icons. It's your big image there. Because a lot of people see this big image when you're submitting to the asset store and think, oh, geez, I've got to fill this massive space. I've got all this like nice space to fill. I'll just make something pretty and shove it in there. And that's just not the way to look at this. This space over here, this massive space, is prime real estate ad-wise. You need to be answering loads of questions. You need to be bringing your customers in and saying they need to buy this at this point. Your icon needs to sort of stand out, because on the asset store, you're going to be competing with like 48 icons on some pages. So your icon's got to be saying me, me, me. It's got to somehow say that. And it's got to sort of, you've got to sort of decide on your unique selling point, your USP, as the marketing bots say, which is like what makes your asset special. It's sort of almost your tagline. So like the one tagline I'm using here, my unique selling point, is animate objects in your Unity scene with ease. You know, sort of trying to convince customers that game devs that like they'll be able to animate stuff really easily in Unity. It's not going to be a pain. You've got to like basically just try and convince the people out there that your asset is awesome and that they need to buy it now. They need it. You need to also be asking yourself questions with this sort of art assets. What might they be thinking of when they're coming to your asset? So one thing that people might be thinking when they come to Camera Path is, I have a cutscene to animate. So how am I trying to address that? And then the final thing is you might start getting emails about your asset from potential customers. They'll be asking you certain things like, you know, does your asset do X or support Y? And what you want to do is, the problem I find there is, I feel like because your customer emails you, there were probably a bunch of others that haven't bothered emailing you, because people don't bother emailing people. It's a bit of effort to actually start typing an email. So when someone's actually asked you a question, I feel like there's maybe 10, 15 other people out there who would have asked that question, but they just chose not to. So these are all customers that you're losing by not answering these questions at this point. So as I said, Camera Path is a pretty old asset. It's been around for like 3 years. It's been through 3 iterations. So I thought it'd be quite good to look at like how I started and where I've ended. And as you can see here, I came up, like when I started on the asset store, I was like, oh, I've got to get like this big, I've got to fill this big piece of space, and I'll just get something pretty. So I just bunged camera path into a scene, made it look pretty, and I just moved on. And my logo, I was just like, oh, well, cameras are moving, so let's just do an arrow coming out the camera, and people will get that. And my logo, the text is looking pretty ugly, and it's just awful. And then I kind of moved on, I'd sort of addressed the text, and then eventually I started asking myself the question, what are my customers thinking about when they're coming to me? Because they're not going to be thinking, I want to make my camera move. They're going to be thinking I'm doing cutscenes, so it's kind of gone for that director's clapper thing. I think it worked quite well. The other thing that was quite big was I was being asked 3 questions basically constantly. Is your asset mobile? Does it support mobile? Is it compatible with Playmaker? And like, can I use it to make 2D games more and more and more? So now I'm answering those questions, and since I stuck these 3 on, I've never received those questions anymore. So I can be sure that not only those people are going to be either emailing me are just going to be like, oh, I'll click buy now, or think about clicking buy. But those 15, 20 people who would have never bothered emailing me would see those and go, oh, okay. And then they might consider clicking buy now. We've also got the asset title and description, which is more text-based. And if you're like me and a developer, you feel a bit more comfortable with text because it's not art, and I'm not a very good artist. Now, a lot of people make the mistake, in my opinion, with the asset title. They make it snappy. That's not, your asset title shouldn't be what's snappy. Your logo and your icon and stuff, that can be snappy. But don't make your title snappy, make it long. Just keep adding and adding and adding. Just get keywords in there. I started out with camera path. That was the first name for my asset. And then after about a year, I thought I need to hit animator. It would be quite good to get animator in there. So it became camera path animator. But then I just thought, well, let's just carry on with this. So now camera path animator is now camera path animator, animate cutscenes with splines. And now I'm hitting all of these keywords. So when people type in these words in the search engines, it's hitting that title now. Simple things like that. Description, it gets a bit more complicated because, again, we just got all this text and we have to fill it in. And I think the best way to do that is write out a list of all the words you want to hit. Just think of any possible word that your customer would write down thinking about your asset. And go, like, get your thesaurus out, get the synonyms, just get every kind of word. And then write out your description to the best of your abilities, and then just see if you can start fitting in these keywords in. Because without those keywords, then they're not appearing in the search engine. It's as simple as that. So you want to hit all of those keywords in your description, and then you want to look at your title and think about fitting some of those keywords in there, the really important ones, because they're the ones you really want to hit. Another big one to add, and it's not particularly visible here, but I've got like some links here, pretty high up so that people can see it above the line. And here we've got like, you can't really see, but it's like we've got videos, we've got the support site, we've got runtime demo. They're like really important links to have in there so people can just click and have a look and just see what your asset's really about, because there's only so much information you can get from the asset store page. So search engine optimization and all that. Quite like this joke. So there is a search function in the Unity asset store, and there's obviously Google and Bing and stuff, and they index your site. But we're talking about now sort of keywords, we're talking about tags, description, text space, all that stuff. A good domain name for your site, if your support site, can really help with hitting certain keywords. But meta description is very nice to hit, because Google uses the meta description for search engine, the results. It will use that as the sort of tagline, so you get that hit right quite nicely. People see that. Meta keywords, waste of time. Don't look at them. Don't bother with them. But seriously, this is the time where you should have that list of words that you made when you were doing your description. You want to revisit it every month. Don't throw it away. Just have it as a Google Doc or something. You keep looking at it. And every so often you might add something to your asset. You want to look at this list of words, and you might want to add a few more words, or you might think of something new that you want to hit. And just always have that list of words handy, so that when you're sort of looking at your site title or writing a new piece of text in your support website, you can address this list of words and make sure maybe you're hitting a few words at that point. And again, just keep your thesaurus handy as well here, because it's very useful. A good idea is to look at competition. So use the search terms you want to hit. You'll see your competition might come up there. Try and work out what they're doing to get at the top of the search rankings. What words are they using? And try and work out, because we can never know how the search engine works, but we can kind of try and work out, oh, it's this word that is like linking. And then also be knowledgeable of what is linking to your asset, because generally it sort of links outwards that goes in that gives you a very good search ranking. But just a quick note about the asset store search. For those of you who have used it, it's a bit erratic at times. They use an intelligent search engine, which means that it sort of has a personality and it gets surly and doesn't turn up on Mondays. I've complained about it, lots of other publishers complained about it, but there's nothing much we can do until Unity ditches it, maybe. But you just got to try and just keep plugging away at it until you get the result that you want from it. So Google Analytics, I'm definitely not the person to talk to about this. But it is something that's you can get some really good information from it. You can find out where your customers are coming from. It can be quite interesting. One of the publishers found out that 25% of his customers were Korean, which could affect how you approach marketing, and what language they're speaking and that sort of thing. But you can find out where they're coming from, but you can also start to find out where they're leaving. So maybe on your support website there are certain pages that are kind of rubbish. You might want to address those. They're sort of exit pages, but maybe it makes sense that they're exit pages. I'm not going to talk much about analytics because I have no idea what I'm doing there. Documentation, yeah, this is how it feels like sometimes. But videos are very important, certainly on the marketing side as well. People want to see videos because it's great having a good description text. So you can talk the talk, but you kind of need to walk the walk at this point. They want to see how your asset works, how the implementation is, and sort of how easy it is gonna be to like put your asset into their project and get going. Video tutorials are a really good method of this because it can kind of just bring your potential customers through the process so they can feel pretty confident about what they're buying. Demos are even bigger. Without demos, your asset's going to sell a lot less. Certainly if your demo is doing something specific like building buildings or tracks, or certainly like camera animations, they want to see how smooth it is and all the different things you can do. Because they're trusting you with their cash. They have no idea who you are. You could just be running away with the cash to the Bahamas afterwards. So they want to know, you want to convince your customers that you're for real and your asset is like really awesome. They need to be buying it. Let's see, time-wise, running out a bit. But so sales, recently, well, we've been running for about a year now. We've got these 24-hour deal sales. They're like a super white-hot injection of cash, Unity Asset Store-wise. Usually you're selling something with a massive discount for 24 hours. In the past 12 months, they account for 35% of my revenue. They're really amazing. And they don't really affect sales pre or post or at all like that. So I don't feel like there's really any big downside to these sales. You just got to get into them. They're obviously a very big different buying style. People are a lot more impulsive with them. Stars matter a lot more. 5-star assets and these sales race straight to the top and will stay there. 3-star assets might get to the front page, but they struggle. 0-star assets will be lucky to get to the front page. And that doesn't matter too much in a sale because you usually get the big image. But after the sale, when your price goes back to the normal, you're at the top. You're going to stay there for like maybe a week. And you're going to get some really nice sort of full fat sales on that. So that's really good. Sort of tearing through this now because I've got 5 minutes. But ratings. There's sort of a 99-1 rule to ratings. 90% of people will do nothing. 9% of people will give you a star rating. 1% of people will actually take the time, sit down, write you a review, whether it's good or bad. The current review rates are generally like less than 5% of sales. So that's sort of where we're at. No rate, if your asset doesn't have a rating and it's been on for a while, it probably just means your asset's all right, but maybe not great. That's sort of the general gist. Generally, you get star ratings if it's really horrible and a customer wants to make a point of giving you 1 star, or they think it's the best thing since sliced butter and they'll give you 5 stars. But that's the only reasons you usually get for ratings. You'll get some reviews that are support related, and that's kind of not great, but at least nowadays we get the chance to reply and we can just say, okay, I can fix this for you, but like, can you send me some like errors or something? Because just saying it's broken doesn't help anyone. Support. This is a support email I received on Tuesday from a lovely guy from China using Google Translate. Because the Sun never really sets a new customer base. They're all over the world. 10% of my customers are Chinese. So, you know, support sort of has 3 sides to it. There's, again, a 99-1 rule to it, in my opinion. If someone, for feature requests, this is, sorry. If someone asks for a feature request, I feel like, again, like that one person means that there are 10 other people who want that feature but just can't be bothered to email me about it. And then, you know, if like 10 people are asking for this, then that could be thousands of people that want this feature, but they haven't asked for it. That might be why you don't have any stars or have less stars than you want. There are bug reports. Generally, you just got to fix them. General sort of response times, people really happy if you respond within 24 to 48 hours. And even if that's just to say, I got your bug report, I'm on it, I'm going to fix it as soon as I can, I'll get back to you. And then of course you do have to fix them. I'm going to move on. Revenue. Here's sort of the history of my asset store laid bare. But as we can see, I get a pointer up, but sort of the first 18 months I had like Camera Path 1, didn't really take it seriously. I was selling like 3 or 4 a month. I think it was 2 or 3 stars. It was all right. Then at this point, I released Camera Path 2, got 5 stars, took marketing a little bit more seriously, new logo and stuff, so you can see sort of a ramp up in sales. Then we've got, getting all tangled here. But then, I mean, I don't know, I'm sort of running out of time here, so I'm going to move on. Basically, in conclusion, we've got marketing, and marketing is something you really need to concentrate on. It's really important. Without marketing, your customers won't know your asset, they won't bother with your asset, they'll go with someone else who's maybe spent some time on marketing. If your asset took 1 month to complete, you really should be spending more than 1 month on the marketing side. And that could mean that you spend, after you've made it, you spend 1 week like really getting a nice logo, really getting that key art sorted and spending some time on your text and description, and then getting it out. And then you can spend like 3 or 4 weeks over, and not just like straight away, but like spend 3 or 4 weeks of time, like just sort of working at things. You can change your logo again, you can work out why your price might not be working, why you haven't got any stars yet. You can just sort of be working on all these things. Going back to the slide, over here, I can't really reach over here because of this microphone, but over in January 2014, you can see the big ramp up. That's when I decided to take marketing really seriously. You can see my sales essentially doubled when I started actually marketing like seriously, just sort of trying to hit every point, trying to work out what's right, what's wrong, looking at the guys that are selling like the big stuff and working out what they're doing right and what I wasn't really doing right. So yeah, you can really impact yourselves in a big way just by doing marketing. You're not even improving your product, which is really sad, but that's just the life, and that's just the world we live in. And I'm not saying I don't know much. I know everything about it, but I'm learning. I'm getting better at it. And yeah, if you don't take the time to do justice to your package, you'll never sort of do justice to the hard work you put into it. So yeah.
Okay, we're here with Jasper Stocker, who just gave a speech on his experience with the Unity Asset Store over the last few years. How are you, Jasper?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
Awesome, I'm good. So first off, what inspired you to start working with the Unity Asset Store?
I guess when it first came out, I was finding that every game that I was working on needed like some sort of camera animation for like cutscene or something like that, like usually introducing levels or something like that. So I thought this would be a really good idea to try out. So that's what I made as my first asset, and then sort of went from there basically.
Okay. So you've got about 4 or 5 assets up at the moment?
5.
Okay, and your first one was the camera one, but you've also got, it's like builders, like, are they procedural generating?
Yeah, procedural building generator, which just lets users sort of play out a floor plan and put it up, and they create buildings in Unity. And then from that, I made a track builder, which is similar.
Same thing. Okay, that's really awesome. So you're actually the founder, one of the co-founders of these London Unity user groups. So that's quite interesting. So what made you decide to start these meetups, and what was the kind of inspiration for starting that?
Well, there was actually London Unity 3D way back. I think 2010, maybe even 2009, like when I started in Unity. They had a few meetups. It was pretty cool. And then the guys that were running that, they stopped running it. We kept saying, "Are you guys going to run it? You guys going to run it?" They never did. So me and Russ just said, "Let's run our own ones," because I met him there actually. So that's how we knew each other. And yeah, we just said, "Let's just do this." So we just set up our own one.
Okay, that's really cool. Awesome. So you don't just work on tools and assets and stuff. You also work on you've also worked on lots of games. You've worked for, I think, like Disney and sort of various other big companies doing various things.
A bunch of brands basically.
Okay.
Over the years.
Yeah. So what's your favorite thing to do? Do you prefer to work on assets, or do you prefer to work on games? Do you prefer designing, building? What's your?
It's very hard to say, really.
Yeah.
I suppose in some ways I just like coding stuff that's visual. I mean, I do love building games, but I tend to like building small games that are just more fun, nothing sort of too big. And then like assets, I just kind of fell in love with building assets because I kind of followed sort of paths I like the procedural generation stuff that I'm going crazy about at the moment.
Okay, awesome.
So yeah.
So you're, I assume, freelance at the moment. Have you always been freelance, or have you ever sort of worked for a bigger, kind of more AAA type company?
I used to work, I mean, I was a Flash developer back in the day, and back in the Flash dev days, I was working at agencies. And then 3.5 years ago, almost 4 years ago now, I quit, became a freelancer, and mainly because they wouldn't do Unity work at my agency. So I was like, okay, I'll quit and get Unity work, and
fair enough.
Then started doing freelance Unity work.
So which do you prefer then, would you say? Are you more into the kind of slight more freedom of the freelance lifestyle, or?
Oh yeah, I mean, I can't see myself going back to a permanent job.
Yeah, too much structure. Yeah.
It's more. Yeah, I mean, structure definitely, but you just get paid twice as much.
Oh, wow.
It's ridiculous.
Well, that's a pretty good reason, I'd say. Yeah. So, are you working on anything at the moment that you'd like to talk about, or is there anything?
Yeah, I mean, I'm working on my next asset at the moment, which builds on Builder and Track Builder. I'm building a city generator now.
Okay.
Not going to do it in the asset store now because a couple of reasons. I feel like I've got too many eggs in one basket. So I want to sort of do something more of a standalone app. Yeah. And it will give me a bit more power. I won't have to run through Unity to do anything. And building an entire city, I kind of worry as an editor extension, it might be a bit difficult to get performance out of it.
Okay. So, like we mentioned before, you've worked with sort of various different brands, like Disney, Hot Wheels, Xbox, and all that sort of stuff. Would you say there's anything you've kind of particularly taken away from those experiences, working with those big companies? Is there a takeaway that you'd be able to sort of give out to people, a bit of advice for anyone?
I don't know really.
Yeah.
I suppose, I mean, I don't really feel like there was many takeaways from actually working for the big companies. It was more just the teams you work with and the people you work with. They're the people. That's where you get most of your sort of knowledge and how you learn stuff.
Oh, okay. Awesome.
That's what I'd say.
Okay, cool. There was one specific game of yours that I haven't actually played, but I read about that sounded really interesting, which was the one that you did for Hot Wheels and Nestle, which involved an augmented reality steering wheel. Is that right?
Yeah, they wanted to throw the kitchen sink at that project. We had 3D glasses that you tore off the side of your cereal box, and then a steering wheel that you cut out the back. And you could play the game with the steering wheel using an augmented reality thing and wearing the 3D glasses.
Okay, that sounds awesome. Was that a Unity project or a Flash?
That was a Unity project. That was my first freelance gig as a Unity developer.
Right. Oh wow. Okay.
So yeah, it was really awesome. It was a really cool project.
So what kind of challenges? Like, I mean, working with AR, it's not something that most people tend to do. Were there any particular challenges working with that kind of technology?
The biggest challenge at the time was Unity didn't support webcams.
Yeah, that sounds like a pretty big one.
So I was like, I'm not going to be a Flash developer anymore. Yeah. And then I get to this project, like, going to need Flash again.
Need Flash, yeah.
So the big challenge was getting the webcam feed through from Flash to Unity. Or I think what we ended up doing is Flash actually handled the AR stuff and then just told Unity to steer its wheel basically through JavaScript. So that was a bit of a challenge, but something I love doing, basically.
Oh, okay, awesome. So you talked a bit in your talk about search engine optimization and things like that for your Unity assets. So how important is that? Like, what can people do to really help themselves when on the asset store?
I mean, search engine optimization, it's sort of that buzzword, isn't it? But it does kind of exist in the sense of you need to work out what your customers are typing in to get your assets. So you, like, if you're doing the building generator, you'd be like, I need to make a building, so you need to work out what they're going to be typing into Google or to the asset store, and then those are your keywords that you use, and you get them in your description, you get them in your text, in your title, and things like that, because it's just all text-based, basically. So.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. Just one last one. What advice would you give? Because you mentioned before that you wanted to work with Unity, but then your agency at the time didn't do any Unity work. And do you think that's changed a bit now? Do you think it's a lot easier to work?
Oh yeah, all the agencies are clamoring for Unity developers now. There's a lot of work out there, certainly in London anyway. Like when I started, there was maybe 3 or 4 Unity jobs out there, and now there seems to be more like 50. Yeah. So yeah, it's a lot easier now, but then maybe there's also a lot more Unity devs around now.
Yeah, that's
so yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of a balancing act, yeah. So have you got any advice for anyone who would want to work with Unity in the future and maybe develop a career in game development using Unity? I
mean, the great thing about what Unity brought to the table is this whole concept of democratization of gaming. So it's so easy now to make a game. You don't have to, like back in the day, you'd be modifying Half-Life 1 engine to make a game. Now you can actually just start from scratch. You don't have to sort of pick apart someone's work to put it back together. So it's just essentially now you just make a game. Just make it from start to finish, make a game, small thing, get it really polished, and then just show that one off. You can show that you've made a game like from start to finish. That's what people want to see.
Okay, awesome. Thank you very much, Jasper.
Cool, thank you.
Thanks.